Deuteronomy 6. Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the judgments which the Lord your God has commanded me to teach you, that you might do them in the land where you are going over to possess it, so that you and your son and your grandson might fear the Lord your God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments, which I commanded you all the days of your life, and that your days may be prolonged. O Israel, you should listen and be careful to do it, that it may be well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Then it shall come about, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you great and splendid cities which you did not build, and houses full of all good things which you did not fill, and hewn cisterns which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and you eat and are satisfied, then watch yourself, that you do not forget the Lord, who brought you from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship him and swear by his name. You shall not follow other gods, any of the gods of the peoples who surround you. For the Lord your God in the midst of you is a jealous God. Otherwise the anger of the Lord your God will be kindled against you, and he will wipe you off the face of the earth. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested him at Massah. You should diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, and his testimonies, and his statutes which he has commanded you. You shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with you, and that you may go in and possess the good land which the Lord swore to give your fathers, by driving out all your enemies from before you, as the Lord has spoken. When your son asks you in time to come, saying, what do the testimonies and the statutes and the judgments mean which the Lord our God commanded you? Then you shall say to your son, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord brought us from Egypt with a mighty hand. Moreover, the Lord showed great and distressing signs and wonders before our eyes against Egypt, Pharaoh, and all his household. He brought us out from there in order to bring us in, to give us the land which he had sworn to our fathers. So the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always and for our survival, as it is today. It will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all this commandment before the Lord our God, just as he commanded us. The book of Deuteronomy is the children of Israel are preparing to enter the promised land. The previous generation have died off, so it's a new generation. Some of them would have been old enough to remember Sinai, the younger ones, but many of them were born along the way. And so Moses recounts some of their history, and he reminds them of what God has said, and he urges them to enter the promised land. In some ways, you might think of the book of Deuteronomy as a plea from Moses to this generation that's about to finally enter the promised land to give total devotion to God. Don't hold back. Don't disbelieve him. Don't fear other nations and other peoples, but fear God and do what he's telling you to do. Don't be like the previous generation. Don't be like the people in the land, but follow God completely. We see, I think, this call in this chapter, particularly in verse 5, where the command comes. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. With your entire being, love Him. Don't love any other being. Don't give Him the place that's His. Love Him with all that you are. And of course, Christ Himself restates the command in Matthew 22 when He's asked, what's the greatest commandment? He quotes this. It's this. And then He adds a second commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then He says in Matthew 22:40, on these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets. Everything that you've read in the Old Testament, all of it hinges on this. Well, the command comes here, but not just a command, there are also some motives given. Why should you love this Lord, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might? And the first one, the greatest one, is because of who He is. Verse 4, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. Love Him. Don't love any other. There is no other. All others are pretenders. There's one God, and it is our God. And He has made us to be His people. All of that, this is who He is. So love Him. We also see recounted for them what He has done. In verse 12, they're reminded, you've been brought out of the land of Egypt. You were redeemed from there, out of the house of slavery. And then almost as commentary on that in verses 20 and following, if your son asks you in time to come, what does all this mean? You say to him in verse 21, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord brought us from Egypt with a mighty hand. Moreover, the Lord showed great and distressing signs and wonders before our eyes against Egypt, Pharaoh and all his household. He brought us out from there in order to bring us in, to give us the land which He had sworn to our fathers. This is what He has done. He's redeemed us. He's brought us out of slavery. He's brought us into the land. He's brought us to Himself. And so we look at Him, we see His activity, and there's much reason to love Him. And then, also in this chapter, I think, we see something of what this love would look like. What would it include? If I love Him with all my heart, mind, soul, strength, what does that look like? Well, one thing it looks like is fear. Not the terror that would, draw back and shrink away from Him, but the fear that does not want to grieve Him. The fear that does not want to displease Him because He is God. And He's my God. 3 different times in the chapter, we're told to fear Him. Verse 2, verse 13, and verse 24. And that it is not that the fear of terror is obvious in each of those verses, but perhaps most particularly in verse 24. So the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, and for our survival as it is today. Fear Him because it's good. Fear Him to obey Him for our good. It's not just the fear of Him, though, but we're also called to obey Him. Do what He has said. The fear of Him should lead to obedience. In verse 6, these words which I'm commanding you today shall be on your heart. Verse 17, you should diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God and His testimonies and His statutes which He has commanded you. Because He is good, the things He's commanded to you are good things. Hear Him, obey Him. It's for your good. And love to Him includes obedience to Him. Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Third, worship. It's not just the, if you want to call it negative, the negative of fear, but it's also the positive of worship that goes beyond just obeying the written command. But here's my heart turned toward Him also. In verse 13, you shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship Him. It's not just, again, turning away from the wrong thing, because I love him, but I want to do the right thing because I love him, which is obedience, but again, beyond the written. My heart turned toward him in adoration, in service, looking for ways to please him. And then finally, remember him. In verses 7, 8, and 9, those familiar verses, we remember him to the next generation by recounting what he has done. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. But they're also reminders to ourselves. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And then in verse 12, when you've entered the land and all these good things happen and you possess all this stuff, remember, it wasn't you. Verse 12, watch yourself that you do not forget the Lord who brought you from the land of Egypt out of the house of slavery. So we love him because of who he is, because of what he has done. That will include fear that does not want to sin and grieve him. Obedience to his commands, but more than just obedience, love. Worship. And that will entail a constant remembering, reminding ourselves of what he has done and who he is. That we don't think more of ourselves than we should. This morning we have the opportunity to remember him, to recount his deeds back to him, to worship him, to express love to him. We've been delivered from a greater slavery than Egypt, and we've been delivered to a greater promise than the promised land. We've been delivered to God himself in Christ, his laws written on our hearts. We have so many reasons to express praise to him, to worship him this morning. As we do, let's go to the Lord in prayer.